my last video, I explained about the Augustan age or the first half of the 18th century literature. In the present video, I will be taking you back in the second half of the 18th century, which is called the Age of Sensibility. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Age of Sensibility is also sometimes described as the Age of Johnson. The period ranged from the middle of the 18th century until 1798. Ending the Age of Sensibility, the Romantic period arrived in 1798 with the publication of lyrical ballads by poets William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. Let's have a look at the literary characteristics of this age. Writers of this age focused on qualities of intellect, reason, balance, and order. In mid-18th century, Dr. Johnson was the important literary figure. His age is considered to be the last of neoclassical eras, while the writers who came after him are distinguished with the prediction of the Romantic period with their focus on the individual and imagination. Writers of the Age of Sensibility embraced new form of literary expressions such as medieval history and folk literature. Classical prose fiction examples from the Age of Sensibility include Lawrence Ston's Tristram Shandy and Henry Mackenzie's The Man of Feeling. The poetry of William Collins, William Cowper, Thomas Gray and Christopher Smart are also attributed to the Age of Sensibility. Samuel Johnson, the premier English literary figure of the mid and late 18th century, was a writer of exceptional range, a poet, a lexicographer, a translator, a journalist, an essayist, a travel writer, a biographer, an editor, and a critic. His literary fame traditionally rested more on his prose than on his poetry. His works include a verse drama, some longer serious poems, several prologues, many translations, and much light occasional poetry. Samuel Johnson entered upon the most successful decade of his career with The Rambler, a twice-weekly periodical. Dr. Johnson's A Dictionary of English Language was published in 2 volumes in 1755. There had been earlier English dictionaries, but none on the scale of Johnson's. Johnson provided etymologies and definitions, along with the explanation of usage with quotations drawn almost entirely from the writings of the Elizabethan period to his own time. A dictionary of the English language had a far-reaching effect on modern English and had been described as one of the greatest single achievements of scholarship. This work brought Johnson popularity and success until the completion of the Oxford English Dictionary 150 years later. Johnson's was viewed as the preeminent British dictionary. In the later period of his life, he produced his influential work, Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets, written during 1779 to 81, a collection of biographies and evaluations of the 17th and 18th century poets. The sentimental novel or the novel of sensibility is a genre which developed during the second half of the 18th century. It celebrates the emotional and intellectual concept of sentiment. Sentimentalism was a fashion in both poetry and prose fiction. It began in the 18th century in reaction to the rationalism of Augustan age. Sentimental novels relied on emotional response both from their readers and characters. The plot is arranged to advance emotion rather than action. They feature scenes of distress and tenderness. The result is the enhancement of fine feeling, displaying the characters as a model for refined, sensitive, emotional effect. The second half of the 18th century, or the Age of Sensibility, witnessed the arrival of 3 major Irish authors, Oliver Goldsmith, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, and Lawrence Sterne. Oliver Goldsmith was mostly known for his essays in the Bee and other periodicals. These essays were first published in the journal The Public Ledger and were collected as The Citizen of the World in 1762. In this, he used the device of satirizing Western society through the eyes of an Oriental visitor to London. Goldsmith confirmed his reputation with the poems like The Traveller and the more famous The Deserted Village. He published his masterpiece Vicar of Wakefield in 1762, which was very well read and famous. He then turned towards the theatre and got the immediate success by his 1773 play She Stoops to Conquer. The second emerging author of the late 18th century was Richard Brinsley Sheridan. He was a playwright, orator, and Whig politician. He is primarily known for his play School for Scandal, which was published in 1777. The play earned him the title The Modern Congreve because it is a perfect display of what Sheridan learned from the Restoration dramatists. Lawrence Sterne was an Anglo-Irish novelist and Anglo-clergyman. His early works were letters. He had two sermons published in 1747 and 1750 and tried his hands at satires. He was involved in and wrote about local politics in 1742. Although Sterne's works are few in comparison to other 18th century authors, he proved his creativity and literary skills in each of the work he produced. His remarkable novel, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy the Gentleman, was published in 9 volumes. The first 2 appeared in 1759 and 7 others followed over the next 7 years. The novel sold widely in England and throughout Europe. Voltaire called him clearly superior to French Renaissance writer Rabelais. Thomas Gray's An Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is one of the best known of English lyric poems. Despite his slight literary output, Gray was the dominant poetic figure in the mid-18th century and a precursor of the Romantic movement. The theme of the poem that lives of the rich and poor alike lead but to the grave, and Gray's treatment suggesting that it was not only the rude forefathers of the village he was mourning, but the death of all men, and the poet himself, gave the poem its universal appeal. In the late 18th century, Gothic novel was introduced. Its origin is attributed to English author Horace Walpole with his 1764 novel The Castle of Otranto. Gothic novels place emphasis on emotional and pleasurable kind of terror. In the Age of Sensibility, enlightenment and the spirit of discovery had a deep impact over the thinking of the people. As a result, we find different kind of tendencies shaping the literature of the age. There were also 2 major poets of this time who signaled the transition of Romantic age, William Cowper and Robert Burns. Their poems were different from the neoclassical poetry. William Cowper's The Task was written in blank verse, unlike the most of the poem of that time. Cowper had included many events from all around the world, including India, and there are references to Brahminical rites in this poem because the Age of Sensibility saw the increasing influence of colonization and poets finding great interest in other things which were happening outside England. Robert Burns is remembered for his depiction of countryside and nature. His works concern with humanity, which again contradicts with the Augustan poetry, which was purely classic and had no concern regarding humanity and nature. He mostly composed the love songs and satires, and often criticized the class inequalities. The romantic spirit which William Cowper and Robert Burns had initiated moved further and reached to the Romantic age with upcoming authors like William Wordsworth, P.B. Shelley and others.